They say that coming home is supposed to feel like peace. Like you're finally safe. Finally whole. But I've learned something over the last 3 months that most people never discover until it's too late. Sometimes the people closest to you aren't actually close at all. Sometimes they're strangers wearing familiar faces. And sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what you actually had. My name is David. And I'm about to tell you about the day my entire life collapsed, the day I came home unannounced and found my wife, Catherine, lying in an ICU bed, fighting for her life. But here's the thing that's going to mess with your head as you watch this. The worst part wasn't finding her in that hospital. The worst part came after. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you need to watch this to the end. Because I'm going to tell you exactly what I discovered that night. Let me back up about 4 months. I was working as a consultant for a maritime logistics company out of Seattle. Not flashy work. Not the kind of job people brag about at dinner parties. But it paid well. 6 figures. Stock options. The kind of stability most people dream about. And here's the thing about that job, it required me to be gone. A lot. 4 months at a time, sometimes. I'd be in Singapore, or Rotterdam, or Shanghai, coordinating shipments that had to move like clockwork. 20-hour calls across time zones. Documents that had to be signed at midnight on a Tuesday. The kind of work where being present in a corporate sense meant being completely absent everywhere else. I convinced myself that this was fine. This was necessary. This was what being a good provider looked like. My wife, Catherine, was a pediatrician. Beautiful woman. Brilliant woman. We met in college. I was studying economics, she was on a pre-med track. We were at a party I didn't want to go to. She was in the corner reading a book about immunology instead of mingling, and something about that just clicked. She was real. Not performed. Not trying to be anyone she wasn't. We got married 7 years ago. No kids yet. We kept saying we'd wait until I was more settled in my career. Until we bought the house. Until the timing felt right. But the timing never felt right. Our house was in Bellingham, this beautiful Victorian built in 1889. We'd spent the last 3 years renovating it ourselves. Refinishing hardwood floors, repainting the kitchen, fixing the roof. It became, I don't know, our project. Our thing together. Or at least, that's what I thought. Catherine loved that house more than anything. She'd wake up in the morning and just walk through the rooms, running her hand along the new banister we'd installed, or the crown molding she'd picked out. She'd take photos of the way the sunlight hit the dining room at 7 a.m., just golden light through old glass. I noticed because I'd see those photos on her Instagram, tagged with quotes like "Home is where your heart is" and "Building our forever." Even when I was gone for 3 months straight, managing a shipping crisis in Port Klang, she'd text me pictures of the kitchen. Updates about the garden. Little moments that made me feel connected. Like I was still part of something. Like I was still part of her life. Catherine's brother, Marcus, had gotten married about 2 years before we did. His name is Derek. Derek Walsh. Now, I need to describe Derek to you carefully because this is important, and if you've ever met someone whose entire personality feels like a performance, you know what I'm talking about. Derek is the kind of guy who talks too much about money. Mercedes. S-Class. You know how much those lease for? He's in real estate. Well, sort of. He's not an agent, he's not a broker. He's the kind of guy who goes to real estate seminars and sells other people courses about flipping houses. You've probably seen his ads on Facebook. He's charming though. I'll give him that. He's got that salesman charisma. Always laughing just a little too loud. Touching people on the shoulder. Complimenting you in a way that feels just slightly off, like he's read about it in a book and is executing a technique rather than actually being nice. And here's where this gets weird. Marcus had mentioned, maybe 6 months before I came home unannounced, that Derek had started a new venture. He was managing properties. Not his own, other people's. Wealthy people who own second homes or investment properties but didn't want to deal with maintenance, cleaning, tenants, all of it. Derek had apparently built a whole business around it. Concierge property management, he called it. Marcus bragged about it constantly. How successful Derek was. How smart he was for capitalizing on this niche. How he'd already expanded to 6 properties in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't think much of it. I was too busy. Too focused on work. Too many time zones between me and my home. But in the 3 months before I came home unannounced, something changed. Derek started showing up at our house. Not for visits. Not for dinner. But during the day. When I was in Thailand or Malaysia or wherever my job had sent me that week. Catherine mentioned it casually. Oh, Derek stopped by to check the house. Derek thinks we should upgrade our HVAC system, he knows a guy. Derek was looking at our roof, says it might need work in a couple years. I didn't understand why Derek was suddenly so invested in our Victorian. I asked Catherine about it once. Over a video call. It was morning for her, evening for me, and the connection was patchy. Why is Derek hanging around the house so much? I remember asking. She paused. That pause was longer than it should have been. He's just trying to be helpful, David. Marcus wanted him to give us some advice on the renovations. On where to focus next. Okay, I said. But it didn't feel okay. It felt like I was missing something. Is that weird? She asked. And she was smiling in that way where she looked like she already knew the answer and was testing me. No, I said. Just curious. I let it go. And that was my first mistake. Work got busier. That sounds like an excuse, and maybe it is. But it's true. We had a massive contract with a Chinese shipping conglomerate, and there were complications. Tariffs. Regulatory changes. A port strike in Hong Kong that threw everything into chaos. I was managing 17 different shipments across 3 months. Each one worth millions. Each one critical. I was on calls at 2 a.m. I was reading regulatory documents at 4 a.m. I was living in a perpetual state of low-grade panic, checking my email every 5 minutes. Catherine understood this, or at least she said she did. She's married to a consultant. You sign up for this, right? You know the deal. But I noticed something starting to shift. When I'd call her, she was less present. More distracted. She'd answer, and I could hear something in the background. Music, maybe. Or someone else in the house. Is someone there? I'd ask. Just the contractor, she'd say. We're working on the basement. Remember I mentioned that? I didn't remember her mentioning that. But I probably wasn't listening. One time, I was in Kuala Lumpur. 2 p.m. my time, which made it around midnight for her. I called. It rang and rang. She didn't pick up. That was unusual. Catherine always answers. Even when she's sleeping, she wakes up. She knows my schedule. She knows what an unexpected call means. She called me back 20 minutes later. Hey, sorry. I was in the bath. Didn't hear my phone. The thing is, I could hear it in her voice. Not the lie. But the rehearsal. Like she'd prepared that answer. I didn't say anything. I just said, okay. Just wanted to hear your voice before you sleep. And she said, I love you. Which was what she always said. But it sounded like words. Like a line she was delivering. Let me tell you something about marriage. It's not the big moments that break you. It's the tiny ones. The moment you realize your wife doesn't pick up when you call. The moment you hear her voice and it's like talking to an actress playing the role of your wife. Those moments accumulate. They stack on top of each other. And by the time you realize something is actually wrong, you're already drowning. In early October, I got an email from my company. They wanted me to come to Seattle for a quarterly review. Not mandatory, but strongly encouraged. And they wanted me there in a week. I thought about telling Catherine to pick me up from the airport. But we both knew I'd just rent a car. It was easier. Instead, I thought, what if I surprised her? What if I just came home early? Cancelled the Seattle meeting. Flew directly to Bellingham. Showed up and saw what she was actually doing when she thought I was on the other side of the world. I can't explain why I needed to do that. I just knew I did. So I booked a flight. October 14th. A Thursday. Arriving in Seattle at 10 p.m., driving to Bellingham, pulling up to the house around midnight. I told myself it was romantic. A surprise. Something she'd remember. But deep down, I was looking for answers to questions I hadn't even asked yet. The drive from Seattle to Bellingham is about 90 minutes. I rented a Hyundai. Nothing special. Blue. The kind of car you don't remember 5 seconds after you see it. It was raining. That Seattle rain. The kind that's more of a mist. The kind that gets in everywhere without you noticing. I had a coffee from the airport. A text from Catherine saying she was asleep. My mom had called earlier and I'd let it go to voicemail. Around 11:30 p.m., I pulled off the exit toward Bellingham. The Victorian was dark. That was the first thing I noticed. All the lights were off except for a single lamp in the upstairs bedroom. Our bedroom. The driveway was empty. My car was parked in the garage, but it was covered in dust. It had been sitting there for 3 months. I pulled in and turned off the engine. The rain was tapping against the windshield. And I sat there. For maybe 2 minutes. Just sitting. I remember my hands on the steering wheel. I remember thinking, what are you doing? And I couldn't answer the question. I got out. Grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk. Walked to the front door. My key still worked. The house smelled like it always smells. Old wood. Old paper. The lavender air freshener Catherine keeps in the entryway. But there was something else. Something else I couldn't quite place. I closed the door quietly. I didn't turn on any lights. The living room was exactly as I'd left it 3 months ago. The furniture arranged the same way. A throw blanket on the couch, folded. The coffee table with a stack of medical journals. Everything was perfect. Everything was wrong. I heard a sound from upstairs. A movement. A creak of the floorboards. And I had this moment, this split second, where I thought about just turning around. Getting back in the car. Driving back to Seattle. Checking into a hotel. Calling Catherine in the morning and pretending I just arrived. But I didn't. I walked toward the stairs. And as I put my foot on the first step, I heard voices. 2 voices. One was Catherine. The other was Derek. Now, I need to tell you something. The voice you use when you talk to someone matters. It conveys information. It tells a story. The tone Catherine was using with Derek was not the tone she used with me. It was lighter. More playful. It had this edge of flirtation. It had the cadence of someone who was comfortable. Someone who wasn't performing. I heard her laugh. Not a polite laugh. A real laugh. The kind where your guard is completely down. I stood on the stairs. My heart was doing this weird thing. Not racing. Just irregular. Skipping beats. Hiccuping. And I listened. I don't know when he'll be back, Catherine was saying. But probably not until next week. We have time. And Derek said something I couldn't hear. And Catherine said, no. No one would suspect anything. You know, he's like, completely checked out. He barely even asks about what I do anymore. I stopped listening after that. I don't know how long I stood on those stairs. Long enough for the rain to sound louder. Long enough for my hands to start shaking. Long enough to wonder if I'd misheard. If I was imagining this. But I hadn't. I knew what I'd heard. Instead of going up, I turned around and walked back to the front door. I didn't slam it. I closed it quietly. And I drove away. I drove to a gas station and bought a bottle of whiskey and a bag of beef jerky. I don't even like beef jerky. I just needed to do something. Anything. I checked into a Motel 6 about 15 minutes away. Paid cash. Didn't want a paper trail. And then I sat on a bed that smelled like mildew and industrial cleaner, and I tried to understand what I just walked into. Options. 1. I misheard. Catherine wasn't saying what I thought she was saying. 2. It was innocent. Derek was helping with something. They were planning something for Marcus. A surprise party. Something. 3. My wife was having an affair with my brother-in-law, and I was a complete and total idiot for not seeing it. I opened my laptop. And here's where things get interesting. Because I realized something, I actually knew very little about Derek's property management business. Marcus talked about it constantly. But Marcus is Catherine's brother, not mine. And he wasn't the type to give you real, specific details. He was the type to brag about success without explaining how it actually worked. So I searched. Derek's company was called Walsh Properties. Not hard to find. A basic website. Photos of 6 properties. All in the Pacific Northwest. All listed as luxury residences. All under active management. One of the properties was in Bellingham. One was on a street I recognized. One was 2 blocks from where Catherine worked. I clicked on it and my stomach just dropped. It was a Victorian. Built in 1889. Fully renovated. Listed as luxury short-term rental and private property management. It had the same hardwood floors Catherine had been refinishing. The same kitchen she'd been designing. The same gardens, the same crown molding, the same layout. It was our house. The listing had photos. Professional photos. The kind you hire a photographer to take. Every room was pristine. And in several of the photos, I could see small details. In the master bedroom, there was a photo of Catherine. Not in our frame. In a professional frame on the nightstand. In the kitchen, there was a cookbook on the counter. I recognized it. It was hers. The one her mother gave her. He wasn't just visiting the house. He was living there. Or rather, presenting it as his property. As a vacation rental. I looked deeper. The listing had reviews. Real reviews from people who'd stayed there. Amazing host, one said. Derek was incredibly helpful and responsive. Beautiful property, said another. Would definitely book again. And I noticed something in the photos. Small things. Details. One review mentioned a particular wine bottle on the counter. Another mentioned the sound system. Another mentioned the expensive coffee maker we'd bought together. These weren't just details from a professional listing. These were the specific things someone would notice if they'd actually spent time in the house. If they'd lived there. And then I did something that I'm not proud of, but I did it anyway. I called Catherine. It was about 3 a.m. She answered on the second ring. Which meant she was awake. which meant she was waiting for something. Or someone. David? Her voice was confused. Groggy. Fake groggy. Hi, I said. Just wanted to check in. It's the middle of the night, she said. I know. I know it's late. Or early, I guess. But I was thinking about you. About us. There was a silence. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah. I'm fine. Just thinking about what I want. What we want. Our future. I could hear something in the background. Someone shifting. A presence. David, I'm confused. Is something wrong? No, I said. I just want to know. Our house. The Victorian. How much do you love it? And Catherine said something that I'll never forget. She said, it's not really ours anymore, is it? What do you mean? I asked. I mean, I don't know. It feels like I'm maintaining it for someone else. Does that make sense? And I realized she was telling me the truth. She just didn't know that I knew. Oh, I said. Catherine, I'm coming home. Okay? I'm coming home right now. Now. David, you're in Malaysia. I'll be there in the morning, I said. And I hung up. I drove back to Bellingham. I didn't go to the house. Instead, I went to the hospital. I know that sounds random. Let me explain. Catherine had mentioned, weeks ago, that there was a possibility of her taking on a research position. Something adjacent to her pediatrics work. At Bellingham Hospital. She'd gone in for an interview. I wasn't paying attention when she told me. I just smiled and said that was great and went back to my email. But she'd mentioned it. So I drove to Bellingham Hospital. It was around 6 a.m. I parked and walked in like I belonged there. Hospitals in the morning are chaos. Staff shift changes. People moving in and out. A man in business casual with a duffel bag doesn't stand out. I went to the administrative office and said I was there to pick up medical records. That my wife worked here and I had some questions about her employment. The receptionist checked and said that Catherine did have files here, but they were private. I said I understood. I asked about the research position she was interviewing for. The receptionist looked confused. I don't have any record of a research position interview, she said. And that's when I knew for sure. Catherine hadn't been interviewing for a job. She'd been somewhere else. Somewhere she'd lied to me about. I thanked the receptionist and walked back out to the parking lot. It was 6:45 a.m. on October 14th. And I was standing in a parking lot, realizing that my wife had been lying to me for months. That our home was being used as a rental property without my knowledge. That Derek was somehow orchestrating all of this. But here's what I didn't understand yet. Why? Why would Derek do this? Why would Catherine help him? I needed to talk to her. But I needed to do it carefully. I went back to the Motel 6. I showered. I changed clothes. I waited until 8 a.m. Then I drove to the house. Catherine's car was in the driveway. The lights were all on. She was awake. She was waiting. When I walked in, she was standing in the kitchen. She was wearing the same clothes from last night. She hadn't been to bed. You didn't actually go to Malaysia, did you? She asked. No, I said. I didn't. She nodded. Like she'd expected this. How much do you know? She asked. And I realized that Catherine was prepared for this moment too. She'd been waiting for me to figure it out. Tell me, I said. So she did. She told me that when I was always gone, Derek had approached her with an idea. Use the house. Rent it out. Make money from it. She could oversee it. She could keep it maintained. It would be easy. And Catherine, who was home alone most of the time, who was watching her husband build his career on the other side of the world, who felt like she was disappearing. Catherine said yes. She said yes because it made her feel alive. It gave her something to do. It gave her a secret. It gave her power. And Derek, he wasn't attracted to her romantically. That wasn't it. That night I heard them talking. Derek was coaching her. Coaching her on how to manage guests. How to be a successful property manager. How to build a business with him. That's what the secret was. Catherine was planning to leave me and start a business with Derek. She said, "I tried to tell you. Over and over. I asked you about your dreams. I asked you what you wanted. I asked if you were happy. And you weren't there. And I listened. And I felt the words hit me like shrapnel." She was right. I hadn't been there. But that doesn't explain what happened next. Because right when she was telling me all of this, right when we were in the middle of this confession, Catherine just collapsed. She said she felt dizzy. She said she couldn't breathe. And then she fell. I caught her before she hit the ground. And when I looked at her face, she was conscious, but something was very wrong. Her pupils were different sizes. Her speech was slurred. "Catherine," I said. "Catherine, look at me." But she couldn't focus. I called 911. And that was when everything changed. The paramedics came. They took her blood pressure. They ran tests right there in our kitchen. And one of them looked at me and said something that will haunt me forever. "Has she ingested anything? Pills? Alcohol? Anything?" And I said no. But I didn't know. I didn't actually know what my wife had done. What she had taken. Catherine was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. They said it looked like possible poisoning. Possible overdose. They needed to run tests. She was in intensive care within the hour. And I was sitting in a waiting room, realizing that the woman I'd loved for 7 years had attempted to end her own life in our kitchen, right in front of me. Because of me. Because I wasn't there. Because I'd made her so unhappy that she'd rather not be alive than continue living this version of our marriage. Catherine spent 3 weeks in the ICU. The first week was the worst. She was sedated. On a ventilator. We didn't know if she was going to wake up. We didn't know if, when she did, there would be any brain damage. Any lasting effects. I sat with her every single day. And I thought about everything I'd sacrificed for a job. For money. For the idea of success. I thought about the nights I'd missed. The conversations I hadn't had. The way I'd let my wife become a stranger in her own home. Marcus came to see Catherine on the 4th day. He brought flowers. And he didn't say a word to me about Derek, because Derek had already disappeared. When Derek figured out the house was going to be exposed, when he realized Catherine might not survive this, he packed up his business and moved. Portland, maybe. I don't know. I don't care. On the 10th day, Catherine woke up. Her voice was hoarse from the tubes. But she was awake. The first thing she did was look for me. And when she saw me there, she started crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry." And I held her hand and said, "No. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." We didn't talk about Derek. We didn't talk about the business plan or the betrayal or the lies. Not that day. Instead, we just sat together. In this tiny hospital room. With beeping machines and fluorescent lights. And finally, we were present with each other. 3 weeks after she was admitted, Catherine was discharged. The doctors said she was lucky. The dose of barbiturates she'd taken, it turned out she'd taken them gradually over several days, which gave us time to find her before it was too late. She'd been building up to it. But part of her had hoped someone would notice. Part of her wanted to be saved. When we got home to the Victorian, I didn't rent it out. I didn't let Derek's business flourish. I made calls to the people who had booked stays and told them there was a gas leak. I refunded their money. I made sure every booking disappeared. The house became ours again. But it was different. We were different. Catherine took a leave of absence from her job. We went to therapy. Both individual and couples. And something shifted in us. Something healed, though not in the way you'd expect. I turned down the next big project. And the one after that. I restructured my role to be remote. I actually talk to my wife now. 4 hours. About nothing and everything. About what she wants. About what we want. We're talking about renovating the back garden. About maybe doing foster care. About traveling. We're talking about a future that we're actually building together. Here's what I learned from almost losing Catherine. The person you love most is a choice you have to make every single day. It's not a one-time commitment. It's not something you decide once and then coast on. It's something you have to actively choose. Over and over. When you're tired. When you're busy. When the work is calling. Because if you don't choose them, someone else will. And they'll take what's yours. Catherine still has nightmares. About that day. About the pills. About what she almost did. But she's alive. And our marriage is actually real for the first time in 7 years. Not perfect. But real. And present. And worth everything. I don't know what you're dealing with. Maybe you're like me, you've been too focused on climbing a ladder that you didn't notice you were leaving someone behind. Maybe you're like Catherine, you're unhappy and you don't know how to ask for help. Or maybe you're just watching this because something about this story hit you. Reminded you of something you needed to remember. Whatever it is, let me leave you with this. The people in your life aren't guaranteed. They're not permanent fixtures. They're here because you choose them. And they're choosing you. Until one day, they stop. Don't wait for that moment. Don't wait for the hospital visit. Don't wait for your wife to almost die for you to realize what matters. Choose them now. Choose them today. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own life and your own relationships, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And comment below. Tell me, what did you need to hear today? What relationship in your life needs your attention? Because the people who watch these stories, who take the time to think about them, to reflect, those are the people who actually change. Who actually grow. Be that person. I'll see you in the next one.